Hello everybody, Venom here, and welcome back to a special episode of RE2. Today we're going to take a look at the biggest differences between the remake and the original. I tried to search for some behind the scenes type of content, to give the game kind of the Halo treatment, but I did not find anything in English. There was some short Japanese clips about the behind the scenes, and also a round table of the devs speaking to each other for 15 minutes. However, it's all in Japanese, and I don't want to read out loud everything. So, hey, this is the only video that I found that I wanted to react to. So here it is, boys. Now, I'm really curious about the differences because obviously I've played the original for a tiny, whiny bit. PlayStation had those demo discs, right? You could have a disc and then there was some trailers on there and some games. And I think that's where I tried RE2. For the first time, the original one. One big difference for sure is going to be the camera angles, and that has a lot of design repercussions. So I'm really curious to see if they're going to list that. Having said that, boys, let's go and start this video. Oh, before I start though, make sure to click the link down in the description box below. It will get you to this video. Please give it a view, please give it a like, and all that good stuff. Let's go.
Resident Evil 2 is an instant masterpiece. It's an accomplished game in its own right, but it's also surely going to serve as a benchmark for how to remake classics in the best and most ambitious way possible.
It is a really good remaster. Well, it's a remake, right? And that whole vernacular is kind of hard to grasp. Remake in my head is pretty much what RE2 did, right? They are remaking all the assets. They are remaking the game. While a remaster is more just allowing the game to be in HD now. There's no artists and people that go in the game and change the asset, right? It's just upscaling and all that good stuff. So yes, remakes are awesome. Really like what Capcom did with RE2. So that is amazing.
That's down to the fact that, in spite of retaining the core essence and feel of the 1998 original, it also brings it forward to the current generation and maybe even beyond, with not only stunning technical accomplishments, but also a keen eye for what stuff to add, what stuff to change, and what stuff to remove while still being true to the source material.
That is interesting. I can't wait.
In this feature, we'll take a look at 15 changes. The most obvious ones of the lot, it's shift from fixed...
Wait, 15? The title says 14. Shenanigans!
Cameras to an over-the-shoulder perspective, and it
yes,
not
the
having
camera
tank controls anymore.
Of course,
are plain to see at first glance. So you're not going to be seeing stuff like that mentioned in this list.
Oh, that's a bummer.
Things such as new mechanics, new locations, new systems, and narrative changes are all going to be part of this list.
It's okay. That might be me being a game dev, but the camera is a mechanic. It is crucially important to how the game will be designed, right? Because the original had fixed camera angles, right? You're not gonna do the same kind of level design with that type of camera with an over-the-shoulder type camera. It's completely different. The enemy placement, the overall flow. The camera type is so tied to the player's perspective of the game, and so much in level design is actually putting yourself in the perspective of the player at all times in order to, get him through the game, that such a big change is bound to have a lot of repercussions. So, yeah, okay, they won't cover that. That's sad.
As such, there will be some slight spoilers for the remake in this feature, but we're going to go ahead and let you know when we get to the spoilery part, so you needn't worry.
I'm all good, bruh.
Expanded locations. Locations such as the RPD, the
oh my God,
sewers,
look at
and
that.
the Umbrella Lab that we remember so well from the original are all, of course, present. But Resident Evil 2's remake doesn't bring them over one-to-one and then translate them to modern visuals.
That would make sense, and I'm curious to see what he's gonna say there, but that has to do with the camera, right? It is impossible to change the camera angle and then just keep the areas one-to-one. That wouldn't work, probably.
I mean, sure, it does that for some locations, but there's a lot of new stuff in here as well. Entire rooms and pathways have been added to multiple locations, especially the RPD, which also at times has a domino effect on things such as item locations and puzzles being changed around
for sure.
here and there. Sub-weapons. Both Leon and Claire can equip a sub-weapon, a knife, a grenade, or a flash grenade at any time. And while that might seem like a minor addition at first, it quickly becomes obvious that it's much more than that. Enemies, from regular zombies to lickers to Mr. X, can often close in on you and grab you, especially if they come upon you in large numbers. In such a situation, the character you're playing as uses whatever secondary weapon they have equipped to get away. It comes in handy in tight situations.
Interesting, and that's not in the original game, right? Yeah, that makes sense because I don't remember that kind of mechanics. So if we take a look at that mechanic, right? Having the option to use sub-weapons like that in order to get you out of tight spot basically reduces the stress levels of having to run around in the game area, right? But also it's kind of like a way to just not bog down the player with like stuff that you can get around, you know, because like if I think about that, there's only I think one moment at the end of Claire's playthrough where I had like a lot of grenades and I was just like, oh, I just don't even need to bypass people anymore. If they just grab me, I will get away scot-free, right? So does that new mechanic reduce the tension in the game? I will say that probably for players who pick up on it and take advantage of it, it does, right? You basically have a stack of items in your inventory that you can just negate damage with. So enemies are going to be less of a threat. However, you don't have enough of these items to just continually use them. So I think they struck a good balance here between implementing a mechanic that, you know, helps player move along, also feels, you know, modern, because like having a sub-weapon like a grenade and stuff feels very modern in game design, you know? So I think they struck a good balance here between adding that mechanic, which is kind of interesting and also like more accepted for a modern gaming audience, and also keep the tension in the game, even if you can have like an item that negate damage, basically. And very interesting. That is very interesting.
Knife durability. Speaking of knives, no, knives aren't a new item in Resident Evil 2, of course. They're practically ancient by now as far as this series is concerned. But Resident Evil 2 puts a new spin on them that the original did not have. Durability. Knives are now a limited resource and can break very quickly, which means you're now always on the lookout for more knives.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. It's probably something they added after they decided to add the sub-weapon mechanic in the game, because they probably found out that, hey, I have a knife from the beginning of the game almost, so now I can always negate damage, and just like the only requirement to get the knife back is just to kill the enemy. So you can basically just, any one-on-one encounter with a zombie would now be like not even a threat, you know? You could just shoot him. If he gets on you, knife, and then you shoot him, pick the knife up, and you're good. So interesting that they added a new system to help the mechanic that they just implemented with, like, you know, being able to counterattack. Well, they added like the knife durability to also make that mechanic work in the game. Very interesting. And see, it's a cascading effect, right? You add just one mechanic, but it changes something that you need to add in order to make it work in the game. And then that probably has an effect too, right? You need to add more combat knives in the game. So you need to think of like new items placement, etc., etc. Like it's cascading, right? Very cool.
Additionally, when you stab zombies, the knife also remains buried in their flesh, which means you have to kill them and then recover the knife from their corpse manually.
Yeah.
Gunpowder mixing. It's not just the herbs that you'll be mixing. You'll be mixing together various kinds of gunpowder that you find as well.
Wait, what are those rounds? I never made those. Fuck!
Which is another mechanic that wasn't available in the original Resident Evil 2.
That's surprising.
Regular gunpowder, white gunpowder, and yellow gunpowder can be mixed and matched with each other to create different kinds of ammunition.
Interesting. Why did they do that? Actually, why didn't they do that in the first game? Maybe they just didn't think about it, but like, one of RE's like main like manipulation that the player can do is combining items. So it makes a lot of sense that some resources that you can grab, you need to use the combine function in order to make them usable, right? Just like the gunpowder. And also what's cool about gunpowder is that since you need 2 of those items to create more ammo, once you find one, you're really keen on finding another, right? So that is like another way to encourage the player to explore. Instead of always giving ammo or a low number of ammo, you can give like gunpowder to have the player still be excited. So yeah, that is a good mechanic to add for sure. I actually think this is a very, very good change. And it's an example of a change that doesn't have a lot of repercussions into the rest of the game, right? Because it's basically giving ammo. You can still like control the number of ammo that you will put anywhere else in the game. But you can also use a gunpowder to just have more locations that the player need to search in order to get that ammo, right? So instead of like, let's say you have 3 rooms, you could just like put 10 of handgun ammo in each of those rooms, and the player will have 30 ammo. So it's like, okay, whatever. But if you put like 3 gunpowder, 1 gunpowder in each of those rooms, well, then the player finds one. He's like, oh, gunpowder, that's cool. Then he finds the other one, and he's like, oh, nice. Now I can craft 30 ammo. I'm happy. And then you find another one, which will lead to the player wanting to explore thoroughly because he wants another gunpowder to get 30 more ammo, right? That is a bad example, but I really think the gunpowder is a really nice mechanic that they added. And if I were to play the original, I would probably miss it, to be honest.
No more zapping. While Resident Evil 2 still very much has A and B campaigns for both characters,
Zapping?
Parts of the zapping system that was so popular in the original release have been removed in the remake. More specifically, the actions that you take while playing the A campaign no longer affects the B campaign.
Oh.
For instance, in the original, in the A campaign, you could choose to not pick up certain items so that those items could be picked up by the second character in the B campaign.
Oh,
that
wow.
That is no longer the case in the remake.
Oh.
Board.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I don't know how the system works exactly, but that is very interesting. So it seems like the original really doubled down on the fact that the 2 campaigns work in the same timeline, right? Which is not really the case with RE2 Remake, I gotta say. Oh, that is interesting. That brings like a whole new dimension to the actual playthroughs. Actually, I really like that. Like at first, right? Because I don't know the system in its entirety. I've never played the original, so I'm not sure, but you are planning like what you're grabbing and everything, and having like that inventory management gameplay that also like has to do with the overall game in itself, right? Like, I don't know, like if you're playing the first A playthrough and everything goes well, you might be inclined to be like, okay, like I should stop picking up everything because I might need that for the second harder playthrough. If that is communicated clearly to players at the start of the game, I think this is an awesome mechanic that I feel kind of sad that they didn't use in the remake. I'm curious to know you guys' opinion on that, because that is very interesting.
Boarding up windows. Also new to Resident Evil 2 is the mechanic of boarding up windows. Throughout the game, zombies will try to break into RPD from outside by shattering windows. In order to prevent them from repopulating areas you've already cleared, you need to pick up wooden boards that you might find lying around and then use them to board up windows to keep zombies firmly outside.
Very nice mechanic. That makes a lot of sense. I like that if you don't do it, zombies will be spawning in that area you just cleared. That is a nice mechanic. And also, like, it's a pretty good example of a mechanic that's kind of self-contained, right? It just adds more enemies if you don't use an item. So the repercussions that it has on the rest of the game are kind of lesser a bit. So it makes sense that they added that mechanic. I like it. Also, it's pretty cool, right? Like, stopping the flow of zombies for boarding up, like, a window. That is kind of like the type of mechanics that fit so well like a city-themed zombie apocalypse game, you know? Makes a lot of sense.
Zombies follow you. Anytime players would get swarmed or find themselves in a pinch in the original Resident Evil 2, leaving the room was the trick that would come in handy, because using doors between 2 rooms would lead to a loading screen. And when you emerged on the other side, the zombies would not follow you.
Yeah, because basically, I think that is probably, if I had to guess, I think that is probably something that originally when they made that first game way back when in 98, I think, right? Or 97, they were probably really let down by the fact that zombies could not follow the player. And obviously, like, that was on the PlayStation 1, right? Like, the game had to load, so even like the transition that we just saw there, like, you know, like opening the door, really creepy, by the way. When I played the first game when I was a kid, those transitions freaked me the fuck out because you don't know what could be on the other side of that door, right? There's something very visceral about that. Yeah, those are used for loading. So if you're loading a new area, well, all the AI and stuff just gets booted. So yeah, interesting.
Obviously, in 2019, Resident Evil 2 is no longer constrained by the technological limitations from 1998, and so it doesn't need loading screens anymore. Also, if you go into a different room and shut the door behind you, the zombies can just bust through them and follow you.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Incessant Mr. X. Mr. X was, of course, a pretty big threat even in the original Resident Evil 2,
was.
but here, he's so much more terrifying than before. Just like zombies, he isn't limited by loading screens, which means he can follow you wherever you go, and he does. If he sees you, he will incessantly chase you until he either catches up with you or you outrun him and exit his line of sight, at which point he'll start seeking you out again. Also, if and when Mr. X is temporarily downed, he does not drop ammo anymore like he used to in the original.
Oh, you can down him? Very interesting. And also, like, Mr. X is a very nice addition to the game. Basically, I think that knowledge of a game is what makes it not scary anymore, right? Like, every horror games are super scary at the beginning, and then they progressively tend to be less and less scary, right? Because as a player, you don't know what the mechanics are, you don't know how everything connects together, like, you don't know the game in its entirety, right? And the more you progress through a game, the more you wrap your head around stuff, the more knowledge you have, well, the less scary the game will be. So having a threat like Mr. X that is basically just, it's non-scripted, right? You cannot really predict where he's going to be and where it will show. They force him upon you sometimes, which makes a lot of sense. But it's a system, right? It's a system that sometimes it will be close to you, sometimes it will not. So that has a bit of like, what's the word? I'm blanking out. Wow, I'm totally blinking out right now. Like, solidly. Ça rajoute de l'imprévu, you know? L'imprévu. God, I need to fucking Google that word. Unexpected. Okay, brain. Yeah, take some coffee, brain. Yeah, you need it. So yeah, it adds a level of unexpectedness that is very important for horror, right?
Missing enemy types. While enemy types such as the terrifying lickers to the hulking Mr. X to even the most regular of zombies have been rendered in glorious and gruesome detail in 2019's Resident Evil 2, some enemy types that were present in the original have been cut out though.
Which ones?
Enemies such as the giant spider and the moth are nowhere to be found in Resident Evil 2's remake. Thankfully, these were seen very briefly in the original game, and their absence isn't really felt too keenly.
Oh my god, that would have been awesome though. Oh, I would have hated that, though. I fucking hate spiders. I don't really have arachnophobia that much, but I don't think anybody likes spiders, you know? Like, nobody does. If you do, you're a freak. I'm kidding. But like, you should probably consult. I'm just saying. That's kind of a bummer, though. I can understand why they did not do it. As you mentioned, they were seen briefly. And like they already add a lot of assets to redo, so it makes a lot of sense. Also, I feel like the base game, the remake, right, doesn't lack enemies. It has a lot of enemies, lots of different types. I don't feel like there's any missing, but that would have been cool to see nonetheless, you know? So a bit of a bummer.
Quality of life improvements. Resident Evil 2 makes several quality of life improvements to make life a little easier for players, not just over the original, but over recent entries in the series as well. The biggest of these can be seen in the map, which is now more intuitive and convenient than it has ever been.
The map is really amazing because you can see all the items on it and everything. So, especially in a game which requires you to do a lot of back and forth, you want the player to have a good grasp of the mansion and everything. And you want him to feel smart by going back and uncovering new rooms and unlocking new spaces and everything. But what you don't want about that, and that's kind of like the other side of the coin, is that you don't want him to lose his time. Because when you're losing your time, you have no idea what to do. That's when those types of gameplay can be really boring. And having like a map like that, which shows a lot of information, is a neat way to keep the player moving, you know?
Rooms that you finish searching are clearly labeled on the map, while rooms where there are things left for you to do or find are highlighted red. Additionally, unopened safes, lockers, doors, or any items that you may have found or didn't pick up are also marked on the map.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I like that.
No more bowgun for Claire.
What?
One of the weapons Claire had in her arsenal in the original Resident Evil 2 was her bowgun, but it did not make the cut in this remake. Her bowgun and her grenade rounds have been replaced by incendiary and acid rounds for her grenade launcher.
Okay.
Warning, there are slight spoilers for Resident Evil 2 2019 Beyond at this point.
I'm good. Let's go.
Orphanage. Resident Evil 2 doesn't just expand the locations that we visited in the 1998 original, it also adds an entirely new location of its own. We're referring to the Orphanage, a couple of blocks away from RPD, which we visit very briefly in Claire's campaign.
Makes sense.
It serves as a pivotal location in her story nonetheless. Additionally, in this section, players also get to take control of Sherry in an unconventional but extremely heart-pumping sequence.
A bit frustrating too, but you know what? That's fine. Yeah, that's pretty nice. The Orphanage section, I wasn't that much of a fan. However, as a story beat, it's pretty good. And I think that if they would make that section where you need to hide a bit less, you know, like, well, you just have more options, I would be totally okay with that. It fits the flow of the game a lot, so I didn't even notice that was added just for the remake. So I thought it fit perfectly in the game, so that was amazing.
Aida Wong. The enigmatic Aida Wong is of course back in Resident Evil 2, and
her
she's more
too.
enigmatic than ever. While her character remains largely the same, her backstory has been altered quite a bit. While in the original, Ada was posing as a civilian who had come to Raccoon City looking for her boyfriend, who she claimed was working for Umbrella. In the remake, she puts up a very different front. She tells Leon that she's working for the FBI and is here in Raccoon City to put a stop to whatever it was that caused this entire mess. Where her story goes from there is otherwise largely similar to the original Resident Evil 2.
Interesting change.
Marvin Branagh is another character who's been given a facelift in the remake, perhaps more so than anyone else. In the original Resident Evil 2, Marvin was part of the story very briefly, handing Leon the blue keycard and then promptly dying. In the remake, he's a much more prominent fixture, proves far more helpful to Leon than he did in the original, and is given a lot more screen time. And that about does it for this video.
And that's the end. On the subject of the officer, right? I really liked how they played that in the remake, because like, as you mentioned, in the original, it just gives you like an item and then dies. But like, that's kind of wasted. I really like how they handled that in the game, because like, you meet him a couple of times and you speak to him a couple of times when you go back to the main hall. And then the way they handle him turning is really good, right? There's no cutscene, there's no pop or circumstances. You know what's going to happen, and you just get back to the main room, and there it is. He's a zombie now, and there's just like a gameplay line, I think, that plays on Leon that's just like, well, Marvin turn, right? I really like that. All right, really cool video. I really had a good time, assessing the differences between the remake and the original. I hope you guys liked my commentary and kind of like my my opinions and thoughts on the game design ramifications that those types of changes have on a game. Don't forget to leave a like, comment, subscribe, and I'm going to see you in the next episode. Have a good one.